Welcome back to another GTN Coaches Corner, where we answer your training related questions. Leave your questions below this video or any of the others, hashtag GTN Coaches Corner, and we'll be answering it next week. This week, I am answering, how do you train for running downhill? How does commuting by bike affect your overall training? How long should your long ride be? How do you deal with the heat? And racing a marathon in the lead up to an Ironman. So let's get straight into the questions. First one from Altiste, hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. I'm preparing for the St. George Marathon, which has a significant elevation drop over the course of the race, more than 770 meters. I understand downhill repeats will be important to be included in my training, but what should they look like and how often should I do them? Even better, a video on how to prepare for downhill marathons would be great. Well, we'll work on a video, but for now, a few tips. Downhill running does cause significant muscle damage, and it can be crippling in a long event like a marathon. It can really take it out of you and ruin those last few miles when your legs just don't want to work anymore. So doing some preparation for it is definitely a good idea, especially if your marathon is trending downhill. Contrary to what you might think though with that damage, it's not from the impact. It's not from running downhill and pounding the pavement. It's actually from your muscles contracting eccentrically. That means they're contracting, but they're lengthening at the same time. And every time you do that, those muscles are pulled apart a little bit, and that creates little breaks, little tears. And over a course of a marathon, for example, those tears accumulate to significant damage, and it's painful, really painful. The good news is you can actually prepare for this. You can accustom your muscles to that eccentric loading. There's various ways to do this. Obviously, throwing yourself down hills in training and really pounding your legs will have the effect, but of course it risks injury and it's not very safe, and we probably wouldn't recommend it. But there are eccentric exercises you can do, stationary ones like in the gym or even at home using staircases and holding weights, where you walk backwards down the stairs, even forwards down the stairs, or simply just walking with your legs bent whilst weighted, will all create that eccentric loading and accustom your body to that eccentric loading. As far as specific repeats go, we'd suggest you run down a very moderate hill and also not too hard. As I say, it's not so much about the pounding, it's about the braking. It's about your body fighting that descent rather than about running down the hill as fast as you can. So bear that in mind when you are training for it. It doesn't need to be risky smashing yourself running really fast downhill. That won't actually help you for the back end of a marathon where you're running fairly slowly, but your legs are smashed from running down those hills. I hope that helps. It's quite a difficult one. As you say, maybe we should make a video on it. Next one, Buck Fietsman says, hashtag GTN Coaches Corner, being Dutch and not owning a car. I do a lot of my day-to-day transport by bike, an upright Dutch-style city bike. Although these are usually short trips of 10 to 30 minutes at a time, it can add up to 1 to 2 hours on some days. This is all at a fairly low intensity, as I don't want to arrive at the office sweaty. Should I take this into account when planning my training, and if so, how? Okay, this is very similar to the I stand at work all day question, where how does that affect my training? And much like that question, it affects your training not so much in that the actual training effect of riding your bike for that hour or two a day. It affects your training more in that you're not recovering when you're doing that. So it's taking at least 2 hours a day out of your recovery from your actual sessions. It may not be doing any damage, and if you've done a really hard bike session, it might actually help to flush that system. But you also aren't recovering. You aren't eating properly. You aren't off your legs. So you aren't recovering as much, and you do need to build that into your training. I would say that probably easy bike riding is probably the best thing you can do as far as additional strain on your body goes, because you can recover while you're doing easy bike riding. But do bear it in mind. And I would take out some of the less important base miles from your bike riding if you're doing this much biking, an hour to 2 hours of bike commuting every day. The obvious solution, of course, is to start doing a bit more of your bike commuting in your actual training gear and on your actual training bike, so that you can get used to it and use it as actual training time. Do it a little bit faster, not crazy fast, and don't you crash or anything, but it's not that much of a problem if you arrive at work a little bit sweaty, is it? I think you should probably use that time for training rather than trying to do the training and then also do the commuting. It would probably be the best answer I can give you. Zach Collins 987 says, hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. I'm in the planning phases for a future Ironman and wondering how long does the long bike actually have to be? As someone that's very time crunched with the long work commute and family, etc., is 3 hours enough? My bike leg time would be 5 to 6 hours over the week, would be doing 8 hours on the bike total. I can fit in 4 rides per week, but unlimited how long each session can be. Okay, firstly, for most part, 3 hours for your long ride will actually be enough to prepare you for a 5 to 6 hour bike ride. It is more important that you do the consistency. So getting 4 rides in a week will serve you more than getting one really long ride in each week. So yeah, definitely focus on those 4 rides and don't stress too much about the length of that long ride. 3 hours is definitely enough. However, a caveat to that, I would say, there are some things you simply cannot train for the back end of an Ironman bike ride with a 3 hour ride. You need to practice your nutrition. You need to practice your pacing. You need to practice staying in that position for the entire time. And these are the kind of things that you can't practice in bits in a 3 hour ride. You don't know what it's going to feel like being in your aero bars after 5 hours on the bike if you've never been on aero bars for 5 hours. So I would suggest that find time, earmark 1 or 2 weekends where you do have a 6 hour ride or even a 7 hour ride, really push the limits. Test your nutrition, test staying in that position, even test your race pacing a little bit for that long distance. And the rest of the time, keep your long ride to just 2, 3, 3.5 hours if you can fit it in. 3 hours will be enough, but do definitely get 1 or 2 extra long rides and just clear the schedule. Tell your wife you're not available just for this one Saturday to be prepared for your Ironman. Next question, CCB Diver. Now that it's summer, how does one really deal with extreme heat? I've lived in the Southeast US for almost 20 years, but races' run legs are often in 80 to 90 Fahrenheit heat with 80+% humidity. I continue to have very strong swims and bikes and races, but once the heat catches up to me on the run, my run just dies. I can't seem to cool down. My legs are fine, and after the race, I'm not really that tired. I just can't seem to deal with the heat. My training points to faster run times, but those are in the early mornings and evenings. Races are when they are, though. I'm in my mid-40s and wonder if it's just too late to adapt. Are there any tricks or professional pointers, drinking kit, etc.? Hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. Well, the good news for you, CCB Diver, is you can adapt even later in life. Heat is something you can adapt to. It might take a little bit longer later in life, but you definitely can adapt to it. And we would suggest that you do go through a heat training protocol to try and get your body used to it. Unfortunately, there aren't really that many tricks. It's more a fact of exposing yourself to heat whilst exercising. What this will do will create an earlier onset of sweating. So basically you'll start sweating long before you actually get hot. So you almost prevent getting hot rather than cool yourself down once you are hot. You also have a lower salt concentration in your sweat, so you lose less of those minerals and you're less likely to go into shutdown mode as you go longer and longer in the heat. And then of course you will just have a lower perceived feeling of heat. You won't feel as hot even in the same temperature once you've adapted to it. As far as adapting to it, little bits, often, and build them up. Same as most other training. So you want to start with 20 to 30 minutes of exposure to that heat whilst exercising. It's important that you do this whilst exercising your body. Exposure to the heat, of course, you can do with hot baths and saunas and that kind of thing. But if you want to really capitalize on training in the heat, you need to actually exercise in that heat. But keep it short to begin with, because you don't want to absolutely smash yourself and put yourself in bed for 2 or 3 days recovering, and then slowly build it up. I wouldn't say build up the heat, I'd say rather build up the duration in the heat, make sure you're paying attention to your hydration, etc. And you will find that you do improve at this. So occasionally, once or twice a week, instead of doing the morning or evening runs, do them in the middle of the day. It might be unpleasant, but keep it short, 20 to 30 minutes, but it will pay dividends come race day. And then of course, when it does come to race day, the golden rule for racing in the heat is don't go into the red. You can't cool down once you've got hot. You have to stay not hot. if that makes sense. You have to prevent getting hot rather than getting hot and then trying to cool down again. Because whilst you're exercising, whilst you're racing, you simply cannot dissipate enough heat to bring your temperature down. You might be able to stop your temperature rising further, but you won't be able to bring it down. So the trick is to not get it up in the first place. You'll probably have to sit under a tree for half an hour on the side of the race course if you actually want to get your core temperature down once it's got high. So it's much better to not let it get high. And that means change your pacing, start a bit slower, make sure that you're not overexerting yourself early on, even if it feels easy. Make sure you're hydrating really well from early on so that you don't get into a point where you are dehydrated, because at that point your body cannot deal with the heat at all and your core temperature will go up. And then also make sure your salts are, you're getting adequate salts, because some people are heavy sweaters and lose lots of salts. And again, your body can't deal with the heat if it doesn't have the tools to deal with the heat, and that is sweat is the main tool. So make sure you're hydrated and you've got those electrolytes in, and then it is really a case of not going into the red. Pace yourself really, really well in the heat. Be conservative. You can always absolutely smash yourself in the last 20 to 30 minutes when you know you're going to be able to collapse into an ice bath straight afterwards. But don't do that in the first 20 to 30 minutes, because you will just never be able to get your core temperature back down. Dominic Zero asks, hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. I'm struggling to stay at or around my target pace during training runs, and my watch beeping at me isn't necessarily helpful. I could use a treadmill, but I prefer to run outside. Do you have any tips or cues to stay in or at the target pace? Or is it just something that comes over time? Oh, well, yeah, the dreaded sweary watch, which ruins your whole run by shouting at you the whole time and beeping at you like you're always doing something wrong. Okay, while it's important to hit the right paces in training, the fact is that you can be a lot more flexible than your watch is probably allowing you to be. So we would say set specific zones for your intervals, for your hard repetitions, and those can be pretty precise. But everything else should be quite vague. Give yourself a really broad range of paces. So your warm-up, don't be super strict. Maybe set an upper limit, but don't be super strict on it so your watch isn't shouting at you the whole time. Similar for your recovery intervals. Have a broad range on your watch of heart rates and paces where you can be in that recovery zone, so that you're not getting your watch shouting at you the whole time and you don't feel like you failed in your pace. The only paces that really matter are those paces on the intervals when you are working hard. So make sure those are right, and the rest of the time, just ignore it. And then if it is still impossible, or you're really struggling to hold those paces, have a look at those paces and have a look at those heart rate zones. It is possible that they're just not accurate enough. You may need to retest. You may need to retest your threshold. Make sure that your heart rate zones are correct. And then if those are correct, then make sure your pace zones are correct. Don't set yourself unrealistic targets. If you are struggling to hold it and your watch is beeping at you because you're not going fast enough the whole time, it may be that you're simply overreaching and pushing yourself a bit too much. But generally, you should just change the watch settings so that it's not beeping at you the entire time. That doesn't make anyone's training pleasant. Okay, ZXY is our last question. Hashtag GTN's Coaches Corner. First, I've been loving all your recent content. Thank you. My question, though, is I'm wrapping up my second 70.3 Mont Tremblant in the end of June. Oh, well done for wrapping that up, because it's now July. 8-month training block, and recently just signed my first full Ironman in Arizona in November. However, I also pulled a lottery slot for the Chicago Marathon early in the year, which will be my first marathon in October. With these efforts being 1 month apart, would you all recommend focusing additional time effort into my runs, or just sticking to the program and tie it into the peak week? Well, it sounds like a great calendar year for you, and yeah, quite a lot of firsts there. Exciting. The first and most important question, I think, is what is your priority? Are you going to be really disappointed if you have a bad marathon but a really good Ironman? Or are you going to be more disappointed if you have an average marathon but a really bad Ironman? Because that is really going to be the answer to your question. If you really, really want to do a fast marathon, sacrifice a bit of the Ironman training, just get around it. It might be average, but it won't be your best. But you'll have a really good marathon and you'll be happy. If that's just not going to float your boat and it's all about the Ironman, you want to do the marathon en route to it, then we definitely say you can do a marathon on Ironman training really well. You can't necessarily do an Ironman on marathon training. really well. So the swim and the bike will complement your run. It's aerobic fitness and it will complement your run. It's non-weight bearing aerobic exercise, so you can actually do a lot more hours of aerobic exercise without that pounding that run gives you. So you can get really fit for the run with less runs and have a really fast marathon on the race day. Whereas if you do just marathon training and don't do much swimming or biking, you'll really suffer your way. By the time you get to the run on the Ironman, you're going to be empty, really empty. So we would suggest you do the marathon, but do it on Ironman training. Do your normal Ironman training. Take that week, taper all your swim and your bike and your run down before the marathon. Also make sure you have decent recovery afterwards. In fact, in that 1 month between your marathon and your Ironman, I would suggest you do very little running, less than you even think that you probably need. The marathon that you've done in training will suffice to prepare you for that Ironman marathon. You do need to do very minimal running in between. So focus on the swim and the bike for that last month before your Ironman. And I think you'll have a good day at both of them. Good luck with them both and good luck with the preparation for it. Thank you everyone for your questions this week. If you have more questions, down below this video, down below any of our videos, use the hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. We'll find that question and we could be answering it next week. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.